ओम परतत्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्ण समाज्ञया यो धर्म स्थापन रतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. Here we are reading Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, and the chapter we now open is called The Freedom of the Soul. We have finished the study of Kathopanishad, Isha Kena Shata Shata, and this is now Chandogya Upanishad. And this is the last lecture in this series. There are 4 more lectures on Chandogya Upanishad in this series, which we already studied under the caption of Practical Vedanta. After this lecture only, the question was asked of Swamiji, what is the practical position? And all those 4 lectures were based chiefly on the Chandogya Upanishad. And this is the first lecture on Chandogya Upanishad, and delivered in London 5th November 1896. After this, in this book, we are going to get the American lectures, delivered earlier, but included in the book in the latter half. So we now turn to this Chandogya Upanishad. And there is a beauty in the Chandogya, and that beauty is that Swamiji will show us that from the rudimentary spiritual ideas to the highest teaching, Tattvamasi, is in this Chandogya Upanishad. And Swamiji is telling now how to study, what to get from this. Let us see now. The Katha Upanishad, which you have been studying, was written much later than that to which we now turn, the Chandogya. So within the Vedic literature, the Katha seems to be the latest, because in the Gita, Katha is the most influential Upanishad, and Katha is very poetic. The language is highly refined, and so Swamiji says that was written much later than that to which we now turn, the Chandogya. When we understand the full ripened ideas, then it becomes easy to study the growth of the ideas. And that's why Swamiji took up the Katha earlier. The language is more modern and the thought more organized. In the older Upanishads, the language is very archaic. You know the meaning of the word archaic? In Sanskrit it is called arsha. That means belonging to the rishis. Belonging to the rishis. From that only this word archaic has come. Very archaic means not modern, not so much rigidly grammatical as proposed by Panini. So it is more archaic, like that of the hymn portion of the Vedas. Let me tell you here, Vedas have 3 portions: the Samhita, the Brahmana, and the Aranyak. Upanishads are within all these 3 portions. We have seen it again and again. So the first portion is called Samhita, and that Swamiji says hymn portion. Samhita means collection of hymns for different gods and goddesses. So, archaic, like that of the hymn portion of the Vedas, actually very difficult to understand those hymns because of the language. And one has to wade sometimes through quite a mass of unnecessary things to get at the essential doctrines. In the Chandogya, lot of karma kanda, upasana kanda is mixed up, and we have to go through them to find the final teaching. The ritualistic literature about which I told you, which forms the second division of the Vedas, that is the Brahmana portion. second division. First is Samhita, second is Brahmana, third is Aranyaka. So which forms the second division of the Vedas has left a good deal of its mark upon this old Upanishad. So the language Swamiji says is like Samhita, and the Brahman portion has left a lot of mark. That means lot of upasanas also are taught here. So that more than half of it is still ritualistic. There are 8 chapters, and 6, 7 and 8 are only dealing with Brahmajnana. 5 are karma and upasana. So Swamiji says more than half is ritualistic. But why all this is called Upanishad? There is, however, one great gain in studying the very old Upanishads. You trace, as it were, the historical growth of spiritual ideas. Spiritual ideas, spiritual discoveries by the rishis, you may say, are a growing process. We have seen how the Devata Jnana, the Samhitas, becomes Brahmajnana. It does not become so in a jump. And so, that development, growth of spiritual ideas, historical growth. Let me mention here that the Westerners and we following the Westerners think our country did not have history. Actually, the fact is that we were never interested in the history, political history. When the king died and when the next king came, and we were interested in the spiritual evolution of man. So the spiritual history is very nicely maintained, and this is one of the best examples. The historical growth of spiritual ideas, that means the history of the growth of spiritual ideas. In the more recent Upanishads, the spiritual ideas have been collected and brought into one place, as in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, which you may perhaps look upon as the last of the Upanishads. You do not find any inkling of these ritualistic ideas. So, my suggestion to all of you is that before studying the Upanishads, we should study Gita. And if we want to know the full comprehensive knowledge of the Advaita Gyan, we should study Gita with Shankara Bhashya. And then we should take up the Upanishads. Swamiji says Gita is the latest Upanishad. And it is very true. Why it is separated? Only because Upanishads are present in the Vedas, which are supposed to be Apaurushaya, and Gita is a part of Mahabharata, which is supposed to be a Smriti, a narrative of the war. And so, it is called Smriti Prasthan. But actually, after every chapter we do same. Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishadsu. So Gita, as Swamiji says, beautiful, that it is the latest Upanishad. And there, the language is absolutely modern. And the language is easy to understand. And all the spiritual ideas, the final development is told there. The Gita is like a bouquet composed of the beautiful flowers of spiritual truths collected from the Upanishads. Yeah. Collection of spiritual truths from all the Upanishads. But in the Gita, you cannot study the rise of the spiritual ideas. You cannot trace them to their source, how they started from the Samhita. To do that, as has been pointed out by many, you must study the Vedas, the Samhita portion and the Brahmana portion and the Aranyaka. The great idea of holiness, now an important part Swamiji is telling us, very important point. Compared to all the scriptures of all the world, Vedas are the most unmutilated scripture. That means because of the holiness associated with us, nobody has touched or edited or changed the original Vedas. Commentators have come, they comment differently, but nobody changes the original. So, other scriptures all have been edited. And that is an important point because we can study the history of the growth of spiritual ideas. The great idea of holiness that has been attached to these books has preserved them more than any other book in the world from mutilation. In them, thoughts at their highest and at their lowest have all been preserved. The essential and the non-essential, the most ennobling teachings and the simplest matters of detail stand side by side, for nobody has dared to touch them. That means to touch them, to change them, to edit them. Commentators came and tried to smooth them down and to bring out wonderful new ideas from the old things. That is, from the old things, the commentators show us new ideas. They tried to find spiritual ideas in even the most ordinary statements, but the text remained. And as such, they are the most wonderful historical study. Chandogya. We all know that in the scriptures of now Swamiji shows what has happened to other religions. To make a general comparative study is Swamiji's habit. And that throws light on everybody's religion. And we'll find that in the light of Vedanta we can understand every religion. We all know that in the scriptures of every religion, changes were made to suit the growing spirituality of later times. One word was changed here and another put in there and so on. That means both commission omissions are there. This probably has not been done with the Vedic literature. He has added the word probably because we have not gone there to see, but from the logical analysis point of view we do see, and from the tradition point of view also. This probably has not been done with the Vedic literature, or if ever done, it is almost imperceptible. Because Swamiji takes a broad sense, he is not very rigid, and he says very imperceptibly one word might have changed. So we have this great advantage, we are able to study thoughts in their original significance, to note how they developed, how from materialistic ideas, finer and finer spiritual ideas evolved until they attained their greatest heights in the Vedanta. From the Veda to the Vedanta through all this. Descriptions of some of the old manners and customs are also there. But they do not appear much in the Upanishads. In the Samhita and Brahmana we can get them. The language used is peculiar, terse, mnemonic. Language is this. Now, abbreviation like is there many places. That Swamiji explains beautifully. Why the commentaries are necessary. The writers of these books simply jotted down these lines as helps to remember certain facts which they suppose were already well known. You know a story, I want to repeat that story, I tell one or 2 points from the story, you catch that story. In a narrative perhaps, which they are telling, they take it for granted that it is well known to everyone they are addressing. Thus a great difficulty arises. We scarcely know the real meaning of any one of these stories because the traditions have nearly died out, and the little that is left of them has been very much exaggerated. This is, Swamiji talks about the Puranas. What the original traditions or the story was there, we do not know. Small jottings are there. Now, Puranas have developed them, but Puranas have developed them in an exaggerated manner. If a man has done tapasya all his life, Purana will tell us he did tapasya for 10,000 years. So exaggeration is there in Puranas. Those who read the Puranas, if they know this, then they can understand the Puranas better. Many new interpretations have been put upon them, so that when you find them in the Puranas, they have already become lyrical poems. That means like a Mahakavya. Because so many exaggerations and other things are there, come away from the facts, so they become the lyric poems. Now, we are getting a new topic here. Though the para has not been marked, a new para should be marked from here. And that is about personal and impersonal aspect in the Vedas of a king and democracy is the outside example. Just as in the West, we find this prominent fact in the political development of Western. For example, Swamiji is telling this, political development of Western races, that they cannot bear absolute rule, that they are always trying to prevent any one man from ruling over them. Now it has become universal in India also. And are gradually advancing to higher and higher democratic ideas, higher and higher ideas of physical liberty. That we want freedom to do what we like. So in Indian metaphysics, so the example is politics of modern world, Western world, and what is trying to exemplify is the Indian metaphysics, transphysics. Exactly the same phenomenon appears in the development of spiritual life. The multiplicity now is showing the gradual evolution which is showed in that chapter on Maya and the conception of evolution of God. That is bringing here, because in Chandogya we get something like that. The multiplicity of gods gave place to one God of the universe. And in the Upanishads there is a rebellion even amongst that one God. Because we do not want a monarchy, we do not want to be ruled over by a person. If there is a principle, we are bound to follow it. But a person ruling over others is not tolerated by the democratic type of man. In Western world, in politics, in Indian world, in spirituality. Not only was the idea of many governors of the universe ruling their destinies unbearable, Bahudevatavad, but it was also intolerable that there should be one person ruling this universe. This is the first thing that strikes us. The idea grows and grows until it attains its climax. So many gods to one God, personal, then from there the climax is no person. In almost all of the Upanishads we find the climax coming at the last, and that is the dethroning of this God of the universe. The personality of God vanishes, the impersonality comes. God is no more a person, no more a human being, however magnified and exaggerated, who rules this universe, but he has become an embodied principle in every being, immanent in the whole universe. Transcendent, immanent reality can only rule the world. That is how the idea is developed. Ruler of the world, it is understood later on that it is only a representation. The reality which is beyond, reality which is within, that only can rule the world. Extra cosmic God cannot rule the world. The personality of God vanishes, the impersonality comes. God is no more a person, no more a human being, however magnified and exaggerated, who rules this universe, but he has become an embodied principle in every being, immanent in the whole universe. Sarvatma and Sarvagata. It will be illogical to go from the personal God to the impersonal, And at the same second point, conception of God has grown like this. But it grows only when man can feel his impersonal reality. If he feels himself as matter, the whole world appears as matter. When he feels himself as consciousness, the world appears as various consciousnesses. When he understands this unity, he understands unity in the outside world. So, personal God, impersonal being. Beautifully, Swamiji has brought it out. It would be illogical to go from the personal God to the impersonal and at the same time to leave man as a person. So the personal man is broken down and man as principle is built up. Broken down means it is shown that as a unit it has no meaning. The person is only a phenomena. The principle is behind it. Phenomena means appearance here. Behind it is the principle. Thus, from both sides simultaneously, we find the breaking down of personalities and the approach towards principles. The personal God approaching the impersonal, the personal man approaching the impersonal. So, in the Vedanta, the man himself is not a person now. It's the same reality. So he said simultaneously this happens. Then comes the succeeding stages of gradual convergence of the two advancing lines of the impersonal God and the impersonal man. So they converge, they become one. If man is impersonal, he is the same as impersonal God. If God is impersonal, he is the same as my reality. And the Upanishads embody the stages through which these two lines at last become one. That is the beauty of the Chandogya. So many stages, slowly, this oneness between the individual and the universal is shown. And the last word of each Upanishad is that thou art that. The Chandogya Tattvamasi in the 6th chapter. There is but one eternally blissful principle, and that one is manifesting itself as all this variety. That is the conclusion of the Vedanta. Manifestation is accepted, one appearing as many. Then came the philosophers. So the Rishi's work is over. They have taken us to the highest and they have shown the successive stages, their work is over. Then come the philosophers, those who explain things intellectually. Those who understand things intellectually, those who explain things intellectually are called philosophers. And they smoothen it out. That means they show the links and how this became that and all that. Then came the philosophers. The work of the Upanishads seems to have ended at that point. At which point? Tattvamasi. The next was taken up by the philosopher. The framework was given them by the Upanishads and they had to fill in the details. So we logically catch everything. So many questions would naturally arise. Next point, we have accepted that the individual soul and universal soul are one. From that, no questions arise. So many questions would naturally rise. Taking for granted that there is but one impersonal principle which is manifesting itself in all these manifold forms, how is it that the one becomes many? And the Swamiji has discussed this beautifully in that chapter, The Absolute and the Manifestation, based upon the Kenopanishad. So here Swamiji refers to that. How is it that the one becomes many? It is another way of putting the same old question which in its crude form comes into the human heart as the inquiry into the cause of evil and so forth. So, in outside world we say, how in this world created by God there is evil? Now the question will be solved if how one has become many can be answered. So this, how evil has come is a little gross form of the question. In fundamental the question is how one has become many. Let me tell you one important thing here. In Ludhiana, there was a Gurudwara Guru Gyan Prakash, people with very broad ideas. There one Sikh gentleman was a good scholar of Vedanta. He had studied Vedanta well. He asked me a question, how this Nirguna has become Saguna. And when I referred to, he himself referred to, he said the example given by Sri Ramakrishna as ice and water is known to me, but it does not explain at all this Nirgun Sagun phenomena. It is only between Nirakar and Sakar, both Saguns, Nirakar and Sakar. That is explained by ice and water. But how Nirgun has become Sagun is not explained there. And I had to tell him that intellectually it can never be solved. It is only through the Rishi's experience. I experience, in the Rishi experiences, in this Nirvikal Samadhi, one reality. And when he comes down, he says that very one has become many. So, how? You will not ask him. It is experience that the same reality appears. The explanation given is that it appears. It has not become, it has not changed. But Swamiji is discussing this question first from outside point of view. As the inquiry into the cause of evil and so forth. Why does evil exist in this world and what is its cause? But the same question has now become refined, abstracted, Sushma. So instead of good and evil, we go to the reality and why one reality has become many. No more it is asked in the platform, no more is it asked from the platform of the senses why we are unhappy. That is all in the senses. But from the platform of philosophy. How is it that this one principle becomes manifold? And the answer, as we have seen, the best answer that India has produced is the theory of Maya, which says that it really has not become manifold, that it really has not lost any of its real nature. Manifoldness is only apparent. This we read in the chapters on Maya. Man is only apparently a person. Now apply that to man. Man is only apparently a person, but in reality he is the impersonal being. God is a person only apparently, but really he is the impersonal being. This everybody does not accept. Everybody cannot understand or feel. Everybody does not have the transcendental capacity. And Swamiji is telling now, even in this answer there have been succeeding stages. And philosophers are varied in their opinions. All Indian philosophers did not admit this theory of Maya. Possibly most of them did not. Advaita Vedanta is always in the minority. Swamiji explained the steps. There are dualists with a crude sort of dualism which would not allow the question to be asked. Crude sort of dualism. Why there is evil? Don't ask. God is done. Everything is just thrown on God, and that is not the way to answer. Who would not allow the question to be asked, but stifled it at its very birth. They said you have no right to ask such a question. You have no right to ask for an explanation. It is simply the will of God. And we have to submit to that quietly. There is no liberty for the human soul. Everything is predestined. What we shall do, have, enjoy and suffer. And when suffering comes, it is our duty to endure it patiently. If we do not, we shall be punished all the more. So this is a crude dualistic theory. How do you know that? Because the Vedas say so. So no logic or reason is provided, and thus they have their text and their meanings and they want to enforce them. They have their text means they have not tortured the Vedas, they are selected from the Vedas, the Karma Kanda portion like that. And their meanings, interpretation, and they want to enforce them on all. There are others who, though not admitting the Maya theory, stand midway. That is the Vishishta Dvaitins, stand midway. They say that the whole of this creation forms, as it were, the body of God. God is one, we accept. What is the universe? Not that forms of God, not that God himself, not that illusory, but body of God. They say that the whole of this creation forms, as it were, the body of God. God is the soul of all souls, and of the whole of nature, we have different souls. God is the soul of our souls, and there is nature. God is the soul of that nature. That is how they unify everything in God, but with variety. And that is called the qualified non-dualism. There is no liberty for the human soul. Everything is predestined. What we shall do, have, enjoy and suffer. And when suffering comes, it is our duty to endure it patiently. If we do not, we shall be punished all the more. So God as a person is ruling. How do we know that? Because the Vedas say so. And thus they have their texts and their meanings, and they want to enforce them. There are others who, though not admitting the Maya theory, stand midway. They say that the whole of this creation forms, as it were, the body of God. God is the soul of all souls and of the whole of nature. In the case of individual souls, contraction comes from evil doing. Soul is pure, but it gets contracted because of our bad karma. That is the Vishtadvaita theory. When a man does anything evil, his soul begins to contract and his power is diminished and gone and goes on decreasing until he does good works. When it expands again, that is the Vishtadvaita theory. We are pure. Purity has become contracted by our evil doing. If you do good works, it will evolve. Appears sweet, but the problem is there, when will it stop? Now, Swamiji's brilliance, another paragraph please mark here. Brilliance of Swamiji. Swamiji shows the common ground between Dvaita, Vishtadvaita and Advaita. And that common ground is shown through Advaita only. But in spite of condemning the other theories, Swamiji finds the evolution there. One idea seems to be common in all the Indian systems, and I think in every system in the world, this can harmonize all religions, whether they know it or not. They are not knowing that, but it is there. And that is what I should call the divinity of man. Man is not man, man is God within. This is the idea, this is the reality. There is no one system in the world, no real religion which does not hold the idea that the human soul, whatever it be, or whatever its relation to God, is essentially pure and perfect. The common points are just derived. Whether you are a Dvaiti or Ishtadvaiti, whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, you accept that essentially pure and perfect. That is the very nature of self. Whether expressed in the language of mythology, allegory or philosophy, any language you can use, like the Puranas or like the Vedanta, its real nature is blessedness and power, not weakness and misery. That is its real nature of man, of reality everywhere. What is that? Blessedness and power. And weakness and not weakness and misery. Somehow or other, this misery has come. So the Vishtadvaitis are not able to explain them. It says somehow it has come. The crude systems may call it a personified evil. Going back to the Dvaitis. Personified evil, a devil in Christianity, or an Ahriman in Parsi, in Zoroastrian, to explain how this misery came. Other systems may try to make a God and a devil in one. One God, one devil, the crudest theory. But we hanker after unity. So one God, he is sometimes devil-like, sometimes God-like. We do not understand, we have to follow him. Other systems may try to make a God and a devil in one, who makes some people miserable and others happy without any reason whatsoever. Others again, more thoughtful, bring in the theory of Maya and so forth. So this also culminates in the theory of Maya. Its appearance, that is the theory. But one fact, so though this is like that, one fact that originally it was pure and perfect will remain. But one fact stands out clearly, and it is with this that we have to deal. Swamiji has picked that up, and from there he has built up his Advaita Vedanta. After all, these philosophical ideas and systems are but gymnastics of the mind, intellectual exercise. So this will make our mind ready to receive the highest truth. The one great idea that to me seems to be clear and comes out through masses of superstition in every country and in every religion is the one luminous idea that man is divine, that divinity is our nature. So from idea point of view, we are reached here. Another important thing. Beautiful song just picked up from Chandogya. Whatever else comes is a mere superimposition, as the Vedanta calls it. What is superimposition? The word here is adhyaropa, adhyasa or upadhi. Superimposition. Something which, this is, I try to explain in my language, something which is not real but is taken to be real in the place of the real. Our body, mind, etc. body is unreal. It is taken to be real and it is taken to be myself. This is called the superimposition. So those who want to write the definition of superimposition may write something which is not real but is taken to be real in the place of the real. Or covering the real. Superimposition covering the real. Whatever else comes is a mere superimposition, as the Vedanta calls it. Something has been superimposed. Important has been superimposed. People make mistake that we superimpose. It has been superimposed in our consciousness. But that divine nature never dies. So Swamiji is reverting to his discovery, the common point in all the philosophies of the world, that man is divine. But that divine nature never dies. That is the real nature, so it will not die. Whether it contracts or expands or all that may be the language only. In the most degraded as well as in the most saintly, it is ever present. This degraded and saintly, this mind makes everything. But the reality will not change. It has to be called out. But saying it is real will not be sufficient. It has to be called out, expressed, manifested in our being, in our life. That is the work of the Vedantic sadhana. It has to be called out and it will work itself out. Another important point. Brahman is Swayam Jyoti. So once we call it, it itself will come out. It does not require your or my help. It is the reality by itself. It cannot bear this covering and it will come out. Provided we are ready to receive it. We have to ask and it will manifest itself. So that direction of the mind has to be there. We have to ask. The people of old knew that example, the people of old knew that fire lived in the flint and in dry wood, but friction was necessary to call it out. So this fire of freedom and purity is the nature of every soul and not a quality. Quality, because qualities can be acquired and therefore can be lost. Qualities are temporary. But it is nature of every soul. The soul is one with freedom. Soul is freedom. And the soul is one with existence. And the soul is one with knowledge. Sat Chit Ananda, Swamiji brings now. The Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, is the nature, the birthright of the soul. And all the manifestation that we see are its expression. Dimly or brightly manifesting itself. The world, our body, everything is the manifestation of the soul. Somewhere in Brahmajnas we see it fully manifested. In us it is hindered, but always there. Even death is but a manifestation of that real existence. Yes, body falls down, that's all. The nature does never change. Birth and death, life and decay, degeneration and regeneration are all manifestations of that oneness. So knowledge, however it manifests itself, either as ignorance or as learning. Knowledge, wrong knowledge is ignorance. Learning, trying to make the knowledge better, is but the manifestation of that same Chit, the essence of knowledge. The difference is only in degree and not in kind. That is Swamiji's important thing. Whether you are a dualist, non-dualist, or anybody, or believer or non-believer, the difference is in degree of manifestation. The difference in knowledge between the lowest worm that crawls under our feet, and the highest genius that the world may produce is only one of degree and not of kind. The Vedantic thinker boldly says that the enjoyments in this life, even the most degraded joys, are but manifestations of that one divine bliss, the essence of the soul. Sri Ramakrishna's experience proves everything. One of his householder devotees, famous Girish Chandra Ghosh, maybe due to intoxication by wine or something, he was using slang words in front of Sri Ramakrishna. What are slang words? The description of the most degraded pleasure. But Sri Ramakrishna says that bliss is only one. This is the degraded expression of that bliss. So he is using those expressions which will excite the degradation in us, or we will express shame and don't want to hear. These are the two reactions. In the lower man, that will excite passion. In the middle man, it will, we don't want it, we don't want to listen it, like that it will express. In Sri Ramakrishna, that is a manifestation of the divine joy. So in Girish uttered slang words, Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi. From that, Swamiji says, the Vedantic thinker boldly says that the enjoyments in this life, even the most degraded joys, are but manifestation of that one divine bliss, the essence of the soul, that is the nature of the soul. This idea seems to be the most prominent in Vedanta. Now Swamiji shows that all other religions may not be able to express, but that same idea is there, because there is a universal reality. This idea seems to be the most prominent in Vedanta, and as I have said, it appears to me that every religion holds it. It appears to me, it appears to Swamiji, and I will show it to us. I have yet to know the religion which does not hold to this idea. It is the one universal idea working through all religions. Now Swamiji is showing the example. Take the Bible for instance. You find there the allegorical statement that the first man Adam was pure and that his purity was obliterated by his evil deeds afterwards. It is clear from this allegory that they thought that the nature of the primitive man was perfect. The impurities that we see, the weaknesses that we feel are but superimpositions on that nature. And the subsequent history of the Christian religion shows that they also believe in the possibility, nay the certainty of regaining that old state. Possibility, certainty. So we have shown the development. This is the whole history of the Bible. So we just summed up Bible in this language. Old and New Testament together. Old Testament and New Testament together make the Bible. Old Testament is the Jews' religion, New Testament is the fructification in Christianity. So with the Mohammedans, they also believed in Adam and the purity of Adam, and through Muhammad the way was open to regain that lost state. That is the difference. They say go through Muhammad, you will get it. That means it was there. So with the Buddhists, they believe in the state called Nirvana, which is beyond this relative world. It is exactly the same as Brahman of the Vedantist. I repeatedly told you that when Sri Ramakrishna was asked why you did not perform Buddhistic sadhana, he said There is no difference between Buddhism and the knowledge portion of the Vedanta. And that's Swamiji states here. They call it Nirvana, we call it Brahman. Brahma Nirvana, the Gita calls it. And the whole system of the Buddhists is founded upon the idea of regaining that lost state of Nirvana. In every system we find this doctrine present that you cannot, another thing, to support that, once you accept that you will become like that, you mean that it was there. In every system we find this doctrine present that you cannot get anything which is not yours already. If you get it lots, but it is already yours, you are indebted to nobody in this universe. You claim your own birthright. You claim your own birthright, as it has been most poetically expressed by a great Vedantic philosopher in the title of one of his books, Swarajya Siddhi, the attainment of our own empire. That empire is ours. We have lost it and we have to regain it. The Mayavadin, that Advaitin, however, says that this losing of that empire was a hallucination. You never lost it. This is the only difference. Difference between different systems of philosophy. They say we have to work out to get it. Advaita Vedanta says you have to realize that it is already there. But nature is the same. Although all the systems agree so far, I think we take it upon the next one. So Swamiji has brought all religions, shown their essential things, and now the question is only process, how to manifest it. That Swamiji will take up next turn. Om Paratatve Sada Lino Ramakrishna Samagya Yo Dharma Stapana Rato Viresham Tam Namamyam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hare Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.